Welcome to the Mind
What do we really mean by genius?
Matters
Giftedness is so much more than an academic label.
podcast.
We tend to think of gifted as kids being good at everything across the board.
An exploration of giftedness,
Originals are nonconformists.
creativity,
People who not only have new ideas,
intelligence,
they're the people you want to bet on.
in childhood,
I like to learn about things, but I like to learn my way.
and beyond. This is the Mind Matters podcast.
Hey everyone, this is Emily Kircher-Morris, and you're listening to the Mind Matters podcast. We're up to episode 3, and we want to just thank you so much for your interest. Listenership is way beyond our expectations, and we've shattered our goals for the first 3 episodes. We're really grateful for those of you who are sharing our podcast with your friends. Our social media feeds are a great way to do that. Twitter is @MindMattersPod, and Facebook is Mind Matters Podcast. Also, we're always looking for great suggestions for guests. We have a really great lineup for the next several episodes, but if you have somebody in mind who you think would be a great guest, please pass it along to us on Twitter or Facebook or through our website. Upcoming subjects include transitioning to adulthood, creativity, perfectionism, and differential diagnosis with gifted and 2E kids. So lots of exciting stuff coming up. Thanks for joining us.
The Mind Matters podcast recognizes organizations who help gifted children thrive. One of these organizations is the National Association for Gifted Children. NAGC supports those who enhance the growth and development of gifted and talented children through education, advocacy, community building, and research. We invite you to visit giftednessknowsnoboundaries.org and join NAGC's movement to see, understand, teach, and challenge gifted and talented children from all backgrounds. This is the Mind Matters podcast.
When I was working as a school counselor, we talked to kids often about bullying. A lot of times kids would misidentify just having an argument with another child as bullying. So when I talk to kids about bullying, we talk about 3 main pieces. We look to see if the behavior is repetitive, if it's targeted, and if one person has all the power while the other is helpless to change the situation. Gifted kids and teens are frequently targets of bullying. A lot of times that's because they are round pegs that we're trying to fit into the square hole in our educational system. Sometimes gifted kids can also be the bully. Today's podcast will focus on the impact bullying can have, not only on the individual being bullied, but also by the emotionally intense gifted kids who witness the bullying and feel helpless to change it. We'll talk to Cathy Risberg of Minds That Soar LLC in Palatine, Illinois, about bullying and the relationship it has with gifted kids. Cathy provides consultation to schools and families to help them provide support needed for gifted and 2E learners to help them reach their potential. You can see articles that she's written in the 2E newsletter, and she's also written several book chapters on the topic of education. So we hope you enjoy the interview. Welcome, Cathy, to the podcast. We're very excited to have you here. We're going to be talking about bullying and gifted kids. And I kind of wanted to start off just a little bit by sharing one of my experiences. When I was a school counselor, we talked about bullying at the schools quite often. And a big portion of what we would talk about is kind of what is the difference between bullying versus just somebody who's kind of being mean. And it is definitely a major part of the conversation that I think parents and educators are frequently having. And, I guess I want to just start off and ask you, what do you think it is that makes the topic of bullying really relevant for us to talk about within the context of gifted children and gifted development?
Well, one of the things we know, Emily, and by the way, thank you so much for inviting me to be on the podcast. One of the things that we know about gifted kids is that they are wired differently. They're wired with a great deal of sensitivities. Highly gifted children often find themselves lacking a peer group that they can relate to. And it is this set of factors that does make them more vulnerable. The more isolated kids are, especially gifted kids, if they don't have a peer group, the more vulnerable they are to bullying.
when we talk about bullying, we're often talking about, the different roles. And we do a lot of coaching, I think, with kids in the schools about what the different aspects of bullying are. So we have, our bullies, the people who are actually engaging in that behavior. We have the bystanders, the people who are nearby and perhaps see it and either endorse it or just don't say anything. And then, of course, the targets. Do you think that gifted kids fall more in one category than another based on your experience?
Well, it's interesting to note that 67% of all gifted kids have experienced bullying, verbal bullying, by the time they're in 8th grade. Mm-hmm. And highly sensitive kids, gifted kids are highly sensitive, are easily provoked. So they sometimes then become the targets. And then there are gifted children who are the bullies. And in terms of bystanders, oftentimes gifted kids might not have the tools, they might not have the strategies to know that they can make a difference, that they might be able to stand up. So I would say gifted kids fall under all those categories. So that's why it's so important just to take a look at what we can do as educators and parents to equip our children and equip ourselves to deal with this phenomena.
And then there's this social relational bullying piece where, and this is especially prevalent in girls, where they exclude others or they gossip behind somebody's back, and those types of things. And to kind of consider that, in all of those areas, you can see how, especially like you mentioned at the beginning, those gifted kids who maybe don't have that easy connection with their peers, they really may be experiencing those things a little more often.
No, that's absolutely true. I was reading recently an article about exclusion, of being ignored, and how damaging that is. I mean, it's something as simple as a gifted child being in a classroom and other groups of children gathering together and talking and laughing, and that gifted child is being left out, perhaps. No one is talking to that child. Or at a lunchroom situation where kids are sitting together, and again, sometimes the gifted child doesn't have a set of peers that they can be sitting with and feeling accepted. So there is a deep hunger. I mean, it's one of the basic human needs to belong, to be accepted, to be valued.
I actually have a client who I was just talking to last year, and she was a 5th grader getting ready to enter 6th grade and didn't want to take the gifted class in middle school because she didn't like being singled out. She felt uncomfortable because at the elementary school, it was a pull-out program where she had to literally walk out of her classroom and go to this other place, and that set her apart. On the other hand, there are all these benefits, obviously, to that program, but for her and her social experience, that really felt uncomfortable to her.
I can relate to that story. One of my clients was a middle school student, and in 8th grade, she finally told her parents that she'd been bullied 2.5 years. So this was the last half of 8th grade. She was highly gifted musically, so she had the starring role in several musicals, and dramatically too, and was just a lovely child. Quiet, not equipped at the time with coping skills for the type of relational bullying that she was experiencing for 2.5 years. She ended up leaving the school before graduation because of the incredible damage to her self-esteem. And it appeared that perhaps the bullying was a result of jealousy and envy, which often is one of the motivating factors for bullies, that looking for a sense of power and control that they may not have at home. Their actions and their behavior is targeting students that they might be envious of.
I remember reading some research, and of course I'm not going to be able to quote where it came from off the top of my head, but especially younger gifted kids and younger gifted boys, they tend to actually be very well liked by their peers and judged as more popular than their other same age peers. And that holds true for girls a little bit, but once they hit adolescence, once they start to get a little bit older, it doesn't carry through, especially for the girls.
And I wonder, too, in the world that we're living in, children are becoming empowered by some of the things that they're hearing at home, some of the things that they're hearing on the news. I looked at the research in that article that I wrote for the Illinois Association for Gifted Children Journal, how bullying and bigotry and violence was being fueled by the type of language that was spilling out from the news media. Some of this stuff really needs to be addressed in the home, which is kind of the source of my hope for this whole phenomena of bullying and our gifted children, is that there are tools that we can give our children, there are tools we can give our parents.
I actually just had a situation with a client who was very clearly being bullied and was lagging in some self-advocacy skills and just some social communication skills in terms of trying to handle those situations on his own. And he was kind of labeled by the teachers in the building as a problem, as a troublemaker. So then when he would go and report these incidents, they would not really react well. They wouldn't take care of the problem. So it was ongoing. The parents even reached out to the school. And again, the school kind of minimized this situation. Ultimately, what ended up happening was the parents were friends with some other parents, and they were expressing their concerns with this other family. And then it kind of spread through the parents. And the parents went back to the school and said, listen, we don't want our kids treating another child this way. This is not okay with us. Whether this other kiddo is reacting poorly or not, we need our children to know how to react and treat people in a respectful and a kind way. And I think that goes into just what you're saying, where when you have the community support and the parent support to recognize that this is a problem and be willing to take the action to teach their children how we can be respectful of others who either we don't agree with or we don't get along with, it was a really powerful opportunity for, I think, both that child who was being bullied and also those other kids to see that community kind of wrap around that support and kind of fix that problem when the school wasn't doing anything.
Yeah, and you're so right about that. I recently heard a statistic saying that 1 out of every 4 classroom teachers don't take reports of bullying seriously from their students. And
fascinating. That
is one of the most important things for parents and for teachers to do. It is to believe the child, just like we're seeing with the Me Too movement, is that when someone comes and reports something like a bullying behavior, that you would believe them, that you would certainly sit down and talk through the situation. There is such a basic level of empathy, self-control, and assertiveness that needs to be instilled in all children to help them cope with this bullying. And that really has to come out of the home, working with teachers too. But if there can be an awareness of that, the need to be teaching empathy, teaching children how to manage their emotions, and then teaching them how to be courageous and speak up, I think that we definitely would see a reduction in the bullying that's happening.
You know, and there's also a lot of discussion about resilience and about developing grit. Do you think that in your experience, when you see gifted kids, are they more resilient than other children? Would you say that, or are they less resilient? Is there somewhere where they fall naturally?
Definitely each of our children are uniquely designed, as I've discovered, and they vary in their basic wiring in terms of how they can withstand the realities of life. And I think that's something that is so important for the children to learn and for the parents to know that as an author, M. Scott Peck, he wrote a book called The Road Less Traveled. And the first sentence in his first chapter is life is difficult. And so helping kids understand the realities of life, that there are people who are kind, there are people who are safe, and there are people who are mean and people who are unsafe. And then just accepting that reality seems to be one of the first steps of developing a sense of resiliency and grit. And so when children understand that sometimes people are mean, and here's what you can do if they are, that begins that very slow, gradual, lifelong process that we're all dealing with in terms of developing our own sense of resilience. So parents can teach resiliency building skills by helping children face the problems that they're facing and helping children discover the strengths and skills they already have and, walking through, well, what would you do? How would you respond? And role-playing situations. I think that's one of the most powerful ways of helping kids develop this sense of resiliency, this I can do this.
There is a link between resilience and vulnerability, and being able to recognize vulnerability both in yourself and in other people in order to then be stronger with that. And I feel like a lot of times parents, when they're talking to their kids, they feel like they have to have it all figured out, like they have to have all the answers or that they have to always know how to manage their behaviors. And that's not reality. As adults, we struggle with that too. And so when we recognize our own vulnerability and we model it for our children and express our emotions and build that emotional literacy with them, it shows them, first of all, that it's okay to have those feelings. And then also it empowers them to then take steps forward to fix the problem, right? It's like we're going to label it and then we're going to find a solution for it.
Yeah, you were so right, Emily. I don't know if you've come across a book called The Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown?
I have.
I wish I had read that book when I was a teenager, when I was in my 20s. I wish I had that understanding of the importance of expressing that vulnerability, to kids. I certainly share that with my own children who ended up in gifted programs. And I've been a person who's transparent about my struggles and, I'm willing to share my successes, but certainly I'm willing to share my struggles. And I think you're totally right. If parents can validate their children's feelings and accept their feelings, I think that is a difficult thing for all parents to do. And that was difficult for me as a parent, to accept the feelings that children have and then really focus on supplying their children what they need and offering their help, asking them, well, how are you feeling about this? What do you need? And how can I help? I think that would go a long way with then letting children kind of think through some of these situations and problem solve, which then if they can do that, they feel stronger. They just feel better about themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I liked what you said too about parents and educators. And it kind of goes back to that validation that you were talking about when somebody comes forward with an incident of bullying, but just accepting a child's emotions for what they are. And just knowing that, there is no right or wrong way to feel about any situation. Now, there might be a right or wrong way to behave based on that emotion, but just knowing that any emotion that somebody has is okay. One of the things that I talk about with my clients quite often is I really try to avoid calling emotions good or bad emotions. And I'll use the term comfortable and uncomfortable or pleasant and unpleasant, because when you give it the connotation of positive or negative or good or bad, it then implies that you shouldn't have those emotions. And that's not the case, and being able to talk about those things, I think, is just such a basic building block of building empathy and being able to solve some of these problems and help kids build that resilience so that they are strong enough to handle those situations or to stand up when they are the bystander in a bullying situation and say something and self-advocate for themselves or advocate for another child.
No, that is so true. And in your comment about the empathy, that is just so key. And I think sometimes all of us lack empathy for ourselves, this idea of having self-compassion, giving ourselves some slack when we find ourselves in situations, and for parents to be able to totally empathize with what their children are going through would be ideal, but also to be kind and forgiving to themselves. I think if parents can do that, then I think it's easier for them to teach that to their children too.
I think when we talk about gifted kids and teens and adults too, one of the aspects that is part of the characteristics that go along with that is sensitivity to injustice, and how that can almost be a piece of the puzzle when we're talking about this. How would you relate that sensitivity to injustice as it relates to gifted kids within the context of bullying?
Well, they're going to feel more deeply things that are happening, and actually even witnessing bullying is going to be more traumatic for them than the average child. And so it'll create more fears and more anxieties when they're witnessing this. And certainly when they are targeted, then they sense that injustice. And sometimes those sensitivities can shut down problem-solving skills.
Right.
And so helping a child accept what has happened and then look at what they might be able to do, to persist in the face of adversity and to figure out, well, this is happening, what can we do about it? And I think that's what I was so intrigued with that Future Problem Solving Program International, where gifted kids around the world looked at situations and problems that involved bullying, and they were highly motivated by this sense of injustice, I would imagine. And with the guidance of their classroom teachers and their schools, they were able to turn that sense of injustice into something productive by creating programs that would help children create a emotionally safe environment within their classrooms or within their schools for other children. So I think that's what can be done for these highly sensitive children, that they can know that they can do something with these feelings.
Tell us more. You mentioned the Future Problem Solving Program. I am not as familiar with that program. I know programs like Destination Imagination and Odyssey of the Mind. Are those similar to Future Problem Solving? What specifically is that program like? Just maybe some more information about what it is.
Yeah, it's a marvelous program that allows children to look at local problems or global problems. The global problems are set by the Future Problem Solving Program International Board. And every year there are a set of problems that they can take a look at and then bring critical thinking skills to solve. So it creates a focus for children that is a very positive one that, works on collaboration, creativity, communication skills, all the skills that we want to see for our gifted children. And I looked at 9 different programs that looked at how children were trying to take on the topic of violence and bullying in their classroom. So, listeners, take a look at their website and find out how they can introduce that to their schools.
Because it's also collaborative problem solving where the kids are working with each other.
Exactly. And, these are 21st century learning skills that we want our children to be developing. And it is through that cooperative work that children are empowered and move forward with their lives, too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that piece about optimism, that's huge. Sometimes I call it positive uncertainty. You may not know exactly what's going to happen, but that ultimately it's all going to work out. And you just have to kind of accept that and take it as it goes, one day at a time, one step at a time, and it's not always fast. It's hard to explain that to children and teens and young adults, though, because it just feels like, how could we know that? It seems forever.
That's true. And one of the things, too, in doing some research on helping children, gifted children, develop a sense of moral intelligence, the common thread through all the articles that I've been reading has been this simple truth that we need to show in our homes the importance of demonstrating the golden rule, treating other people as we want to be treated. And if every parent would be able to do that in terms of how they communicate with their children, if every teacher would emphasize that in the classroom, then I think as parents and teachers, we would really be able to move forward through all situations with a greater sense of hope, and teaching children to be kind and teaching them to act in a safe way. Just something very simple like that, following the golden rule. I think we'll be in good shape if we can do those things.
Earlier you mentioned that story about your client and the day after the election, and you mentioned that client was on the autism spectrum. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious, where do you see twice exceptional learners, those gifted kids who have those other diagnoses, where do you see them fitting into this whole bullying situation?
It's not an easy road for our 2E kids. And again, they can be taught to modulate some of their behaviors. I love the book Living with Intensity, which you probably have read, edited by Susan Daniel and Michael Pichowski, and helping our twice exceptional children to realize all the gifts that they have and some of the challenges that they have and how they might modify some of their behavior is a helpful way, I would say, to approach some of the situations where children are bullied.
Speaking specifically about gifted kids on the autism spectrum and that twice exceptional piece in bullying, on the one hand, it's interesting. Sometimes I see them, because they do struggle to read those social cues, they sometimes don't even pick up on the fact that someone's being mean to them. It just kind of goes over their head, and they're like, and on the one hand, I kind of go, well, I'm glad that they're not being majorly impacted by this. On the other hand, they need to be able to protect themselves and self-advocate. But who I sometimes really feel for in those situations are the parents, because the parents see it happening and it hurts them so much, and they don't want their child to be excluded or teased or whatever that might be. And so, that's an interesting situation, I think, that some of those 2E kids get into. And when you were talking about where the kids sometimes overreact, I feel like one of the major things that I talk to kids about is, what is the difference between teasing, like gentle, friendly teasing, mean teasing, but not really bullying, and then true bullying, or sometimes even just an accidental hurt. And I think, again, a lot of times, whether you're talking about a twice exceptional learner or maybe just a gifted kid who has a lot of asynchronous development, sometimes they have a hard time interpreting that and figuring out exactly how to handle those situations.
Definitely. I remember as a classroom teacher, parents coming to me and describing situations that would be typical situations you'd see on a playground, not involving bullying, but involving insensitivity. And my having to say, sometimes we do have to put on a sweater of toughness. Sometimes things are going to be said, and sometimes you do ignore some of the stuff and you walk away from it. Other times, obviously, you do need to tell someone or tell someone to stop. But it is that idea that we can get through some of it, but we definitely have to address some of it too.
So as we kind of wrap up our conversation, we've talked about several different books and texts, and we will link to those on our webpage if people are interested in finding out more about those and going back and seeking them out. Are there other resources that you would recommend beyond what we've spoken about today?
Definitely. One of my favorite resources in terms of addressing bullying in the classroom and bullying in the home too, which sometimes occurs. This resource is called Creating Emotionally Safe Schools. It's by Jane Bluestein. Then Mindset by Carol S. Dweck, helping our children have this idea of a growth mindset, that things will get better, that they can cope, that they can learn new skills, that it might be difficult, but it will get easier if they persist. That book would be a great resource. And then, of course, The Bully, The Bullied, and The Bystander by Barbara Coloroso. And one book that changed my life, changed my classroom, helped me connect with children and parents and other teachers is called The Laughing Classroom by Diane Lumens. This is a book that moved the level of emotional safety in my classroom to a level that I had never experienced before. And it was all about empowering gifted kids, utilizing a sense of humor to help them cope. Because when you are able to find your sense of humor, you are able to problem solve more easily. You are able to reduce your stress more easily. And I think that is so important, that in the midst of everything that we're experiencing in this world, in this country, everything that happens with bullying, that if people don't lose their sense of perspective, that would be very helpful. And you can keep your sense of perspective if you can keep your sense of humor. If you know that years from now, some of the minor things that we're facing, we may be laughing about. And some of the serious things that we're facing, we can figure them out better if we do have that sense of humor that's always ready to be accessed.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Cathy, for your time. I know we could probably talk about many other things that we didn't go off on tangents. And so, but we appreciate your time, and hopefully maybe we'll have a chance to have you back on in the future. And thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Emily. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today. I would be delighted to come back again and share more with you.
By the way, Cathy's on Twitter at Illinois2E. That's the word Illinois, the number 2, the letter E, or on our website at mindsthatsoar.com. We recorded our interview with Cathy well before the incident occurred last week in Parkland, Florida. But I can't let the closing of this episode pass without thinking about the parallels between that big T trauma and the everyday, chronic, little t trauma experienced by kids who don't feel safe in their schools because of bullying. While gifted kids are not the only children experiencing bullying, we need these kids to become the leaders who will change their schools now in the short term and our society in the long term. Their emotional intensity is a strength they can use to be the change we need to see. When we view these situations through the lens of giftedness, we can give these kids the tools and support they need to take action. More to come in just a minute.
To reach the Mind Matters podcast, go to our website, mindmatterspodcast.com, and click on Contact. Follow us on Twitter at Mind Matters Pod, on Facebook at Mind Matters Podcast, or you can reach our YouTube channel through our website.
There was this kid who would slam my head into the wall, and then one time he got a cut on me that was really big and it had blood coming out, and he was just really mean. But finally I don't remember how, but I just got him to stop.
There's one kid at my school who used to always call people names, and he only got sent to the principal's office only like 3 times when he deserved like way more.
I was at summer school, and there was this girl who was playing with something. I'm not sure what it was. Another girl came and she like took it from her and was like holding it away from her.
My brother faced a lot more of it than I did. I know that there were times in middle school where people would just bother me. It was like they wanted to get a reaction out of you.
In elementary school, my class actually kind of went down in history as being one of the worst classes with bullying. So I was bullied for being gifted as well as pretty much everything else.
I was doing this comic club at school, and I had taken the poster down for it because everybody had already signed up for it. He had apparently saw me, and he got mad at me for taking that down, and I just tried to explain to him that it was just my poster that I put up there, but he didn't understand, and then he started teasing me, and then from then on, it became a big problem.
I kind of got the impression from this sort of alpha clique that, hey, you're around to be smart. When we need answers, we'll take them. But everything else is about you is irrelevant and, worthy of making fun of.
I tried to stay out of it the best I could.
Don't listen to them. Don't pay attention to what they're saying, because they're probably just letting their own anger out on you.
Never be afraid to go seek out help from adults, from your parents, from your friends, because it's not something that you should have to deal with by yourself.
Being on the receiving end of that bullying, I think, was both a blessing and a curse, because I think most of us tend to be pretty sensitive people and very, very prone to overthinking.
The main thing to focus on is that it is a very temporary problem.
I mean, bullying is bad, and there's no real overreaction to it, but to take it so much further into yourself than other kids might.
And just say it's not the end of the world.
I just wish we could all pick each other up instead of tearing each other down. Life's already hard enough.
Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.
I've been running round in circles, chasing my tail and lost my way, seeking shelter in different corners, never finding a place to stay. Somehow ended up here on the ground. Brother, help me up, I've fallen down.
Thanks for listening to the Mind Matters podcast with Emily Kircher-Morris. To learn more about us and our mission, go to mindmatterspodcast.com. If you'd like to show your support for Mind Matters, find us in Apple iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe and leave us a positive review. Start a discussion and follow us on Twitter at Mind Matters Pod or on Facebook at Mind Matters Podcast. Help us spread the word about the Mind Matters podcast.
Brother, help me up, I've fallen down.
Mind Matters is a production of Morris Creative Services.